my name is Charlotte and welcome to or back to my channel. Today we are finally going to be putting yarn to needles, so we're going to be casting on today. If you haven't seen my last two videos, please do go check them out. The first one's talking all about yarn, then we're talking all about needles and accessories, so it's really important to get the right yarn and needles before starting casting on, so do go check those out if you haven't already. I upload to my YouTube channel every Wednesday, but if you can't wait until Wednesday and you just want to hang out with me before then, I do stream on Twitch 3 days a week, Monday 6 PM, Tuesday 11 AM and Thursday 6 PM British Summer Time, where I do a knit and natter, I give knitting advice and I just hang out with you guys. I also have an Instagram where I post all of my finished objects and everything I'm working on at the moment, so if you want to go see everything I'm working on now, please do go check out my Instagram at @SmichaelGoesKnitting. I also have a Patreon, so from £3 a month, if you want to support me and my art, you can get a load of different benefits, such as being included in the end screen of this video, all the way up to free patterns before general release. So if you are interested in those, please do go check that out. The links will be in the description. So this video is aimed at beginners, but if you are a knitter and you know how to cast on, please do comment down below what your favourite cast on method is. I will be stating later in the video what my favourite is, so stay tuned for that. Next week we're going to be doing the knit stitch and purl stitch. I'll be teaching you how to do those and what the benefits of each of those are. So if you are looking forward to that, please do subscribe to my channel and click the notification bell. Make sure it's on all videos so you don't miss any of my uploads. And if you like this video too, please give me a like. As I mentioned, I am only going to be teaching you 3 methods to cast on today. That's because there are so many different methods and these 3 are probably the most beginner friendly out of all of them if you don't know how to knit. I will be doing a later video on more methods to cast on once you're more comfortable with knitting, so do stay tuned for that if you're interested. The methods that I'm going to be teaching you in this video I've used many times. One of them is my favourite ever cast on method, so I will be going through those, the benefits, the disadvantages of each of them and how to do them. Just a quick disclaimer before we get into the video, as with everything knitting, these methods can be known by different names. So what I've done is I've done my research and I tried to find out all the different names that they're known by, just so I can inform you so that if you are looking for more information, you may be able to find it under a different name. Before we start the video, I do want to talk about the top I'm wearing. I knitted this myself. It's called the Summer Secret Crop by Jessie May on Instagram. She has posted this for free on her Ravelry, and the caveat for that is that people donate or think about kind of their own privilege and the Black Lives Matters movement, and I think it's very important that we keep the momentum going for such an important movement. So I personally have donated to a few various funds in the US. I would implore you, if you are interested in this top, it's very cute, please do go and check that out, and also just to kind of think about our own privilege and what we can personally do to help this movement and get basic human rights. Although I live in the UK and it doesn't seem as serious as in the US, I believe that the microaggressions and the racism in this country is still a big issue. So I've spent time educating myself to make sure that I can combat it in a way that I personally can contribute. And so I implore all of you to consider your privilege and educate yourselves so that we can make this world a better place for everyone here. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Before we start knitting, we need to create a slip knot. This is to secure the yarn to your needle so you can start casting on without everything falling apart. I know some knitters don't like the slip knot, they don't like how it looks in their work, so they twist the yarn onto the needle. But as a beginner, I would recommend you do create a slip knot before casting on, because it just makes it that bit more secure for you. First, what I do is take the tail of the yarn in my left hand and drape it over my index and middle finger of my right hand. Then I wrap it once anti-clockwise around my fingers so there are 2 strands of yarn on the back of my fingers. I then split my index and middle fingers slightly, and using your left finger push the bottom strand up and pull, making sure you don't pull the tail all the way through. You make the loop smaller by pulling the tail of the yarn, making it bigger, pulling on the actual loop. Make sure you have enough tail to wrap around your fingers, and then you can place the loop on your needle, pull tight.
Sometimes the way you tie the knot means that working yarn is the strand that tightens the loop, not the tail yarn, so do be aware of this.
The first method we are going to talk about is the backwards loop method. It's also known as the thumb cast on method, or the single cast on method, or the E cast on, so quite a few names there. This is generally what beginners start on. It's what I personally started on with casting on. It's not the prettiest, but it gets the job done.
So first you have the slip knot on the needle. This will be held in the right hand along with the tail, as you won't be needing the tail for this method. I place my right index finger on the slip knot so it doesn't slip around when casting on. Holding the working yarn, which is a strand connected to ball of yarn, in your left hand, lay the strand over your middle, ring and pinky finger and closing the fingers around the yarn. Not too tight as you don't want to get a cramp, and you want the yarn to slide nicely through your fingers, but not too loose as this creates tension issues with your cast on. Now, the star of the show is your thumb. Pull your right hand slightly away from your left so there's a bit of tension on this strand in the middle. Now your thumb needs to sweep down on top of the yarn and wrap the yarn around the thumb and pick it back up again. I know this description is a bit difficult to visualize, so I'll do this again. So it should look like this now, and you want to take the needle and bring it under the twist on the thumb on the inside of your palm. Then slip your thumb out and pull the working yarn snug on the needle, not too tight otherwise you won't be able to knit it, but not too loose otherwise there'll be big gaps in the cast on edge, like you see with the one that I have later. Then continue to do the same thing until you've reached the number of stitches that you require. So this is what you should have on your needle. You'll have loops around the needle and then there'll be a line of yarn underneath.
So the pros. This is generally the easiest cast on method, which makes it good for kids to learn. It's also generally quite a loose cast on method, so it's good for casting on underarms and necklines. And also it is good for mid-project casting on. If you're working on something and need to cast on more stitches, the backwards loop method is a good method to use. Finally, we will get into the cons, but because you don't usually see this edge when you're working on a project, because it's usually at a neckline or something else, you don't really have to worry how it looks when you are working on a project with it. Now for the cons, it is a difficult cast on method to keep a good tension, as you'll see in my little clips. Even though I've been knitting for 10 years, it still doesn't look all that pretty when I cast on using that method, so I tend to use a different method. Also, as a beginner, you won't have the tension down. It took me years to get a good consistent tension with my knitting. You can end up with even bigger loops and big gaps. I had a friend who was starting to learn and she'd just have a long loop in her cast on and she didn't know how she got it. It's just because there was a lot of issues with tension. So if you are concerned about it looking immaculate, maybe this is one to start learning how to knit with and then moving on to one of the other cast on methods. The next cast on method I'm going to be teaching you is the Longtail cast on, which is also called the 2-strand cast on, or also the Slingshot, which I'll get into in a moment. This cast on method, as the name suggests, you also use the tail to create the stitches on your needle. This cast on is by far the most common cast on used by knitters. I personally use it all the time, even though I've learned other ones, I always end up going back to Longtail cast on. Because you are using the tail, you do need to be mindful of how long a tail you create when you create the slip knot. So that's something that's an added point that you need to think about with this method.
Now, no one wants to start casting on and not have enough length of tail for the rest of the stitches and have to undo it all and recast on. So what I do is wrap my yarn around my needle as many times as the stitches I need, or a multiple of that. So here I want 20 stitches, so I've cast on 10. I will double this and add a bit of extra length just to be sure. I know a tail doesn't look too pretty, but in later videos I will show you how to weave those in. So we have the tail long enough for all of our stitches. Again, the needle is in the right hand and the tail and working yarn will drape. You want the tail to be at the front, closest to you. Then, about 3 inches down the yarn, you want to grab the 2 strands with either your middle ring and pinky finger or between your middle and ring finger, whichever you prefer. Then you need to push open the yarn threads with your thumb and forefinger on your left hand. With my right hand, I put my finger over the slip knot so it doesn't slide around. Now turn your palm to face you, and now it looks like a slingshot. Then, like the backwards loop method, take the needle under the loop on your thumb, but don't move your thumb yet. You want to bring the needle down into the middle of the loop on your index finger, pick up that stitch, then pull the needle towards you. Once it's passed under the top strand going to your thumb, slip your thumb out and pull it snug. Make sure the stitches are on the needle and not just the needle point so it doesn't slip off. Again, continue this motion until you have all the stitches cast on that you need. So this is what it should look like once you've cast on. As you can see, it looks like there's already the first row knitted, so it's very obvious cast on edge.
What's important to note about this method is that the strands going around your thumb go underneath the stitch, and the strands that are around your index finger go around the needle. So it is important that you have the working yarn, the yarn leading to the ball of yarn, on your index finger rather than your thumb, because it uses a lot more yarn. So the pros for this method. First off, in my personal opinion, it looks so much prettier than the backwards loop cast on. The edge is fairly strong and stable. It's really quick to do once you get the hang of it, so you can quickly cast on a lot of stitches for your project. It's very versatile and can be used for almost any project. And I personally find that it is quite stretchy. It's not the most stretchy cast on method, but it is very stretchy, so you won't have weird warping if you have the correct tension. The cons are it is a bit tricky for newcomers. It's quite tricky to get used to the movement of everything, so it's not something for someone who is literally just picking up their first pair of needles and yarn. Unlike the backwards loop cast on where it's easy to cast on too loose, with the Longtail cast on, it's very easy to cast on too tight, and that makes it difficult to knit, and also it makes your work taper towards the start, which is never a good thing. This cast on method also can't be done in the middle of a project, so if you are trying to work the underarms of a sweater, you can't use Longtail cast on for this because you need the 2 strands to get it sorted. Also, as we discussed earlier, it is very easy to make the tail too short. I can't count the number of times where I've thought I've left the tail long enough, tried to cast on all my stitches and be like 5 stitches short and have to take the whole thing apart again, move the slip knot, and then recast on all those stitches. And I never usually do small projects, so it's very frustrating. Also, although it is quite a stretchy cast on, it's not stretchy enough for certain projects, such as knee-high socks, so it might not be appropriate for all projects where you need a lot of stretch at the start. The final method I'm going to be teaching you is the Old Norwegian cast on method, also known as the gem twisted rib. This is very good for those projects that need that extra stretch. For example, if you have wider shoulders, then you do a waist and you're doing something that shapes at the waist, maybe start off with a stretchier cast on. Also, for some socks, if you want to go a bit higher on the leg, it might be useful to have a stretchier cast on. Please do be aware that when buying yarn, this method does use a lot more yarn than a Longtail cast on. So make sure that you have the extra length on tail, and make sure when you're buying yarn you do kind of factor that in and get more yarn than less yarn. I do have a video all about yarn if you're interested, so please do go check that out. Also, a pro tip, if you want to make this cast on even stretchier, then size up the needles that you're going to be using for the cast on edge and then go back to your normal needles. If you want to know more about needles, I did do a video about needles last week, so do go check that out as well.
This method is incredibly similar to Longtail cast on. It starts off the same way, but instead of going under the thumb, you need to take the needle under both threads that go to your thumb. Then bring the needle down into the center loop of your thumb. You then want to bring the needle down into the middle loop on your index finger. You want to pick up that stitch and then pull the needle towards you through the little triangle that's created here. If you've done it right, then there should be one loop on the needle. Slip your thumb out and pull it taut. This method is a bit more complex, so I will do this again to show you a bit more clearly. So this is what it should look like on your needle. As you can see, very similar to Longtail cast on, but it looks more like there are 2 rows of knitting already completed.
The pros for this is very similar to Longtail cast on because it is a very similar method. However, you do get that extra stretch, so it is more appropriate for projects that you need that bit of extra stretch for. Also, it's very quick and easy to do once you learn how to do it. Now for cons. Like Longtail cast on, it is quite difficult to get to grips with if you are a beginner, so I wouldn't recommend this straight away. Again, it is easy to cast on too tight, so you don't have that extra stretch, so you do need to be really mindful that you're getting a good consistent tension when casting on. Again, this can't be done in the middle of a project because it does require that tail to cast on. And as I mentioned, it's very easy, especially for this cast on method, to have the tail too short, and I don't think I've ever successfully had a long enough tail to cast on enough stitches. So you do really need that extra length. I'd say have 1.5 times the amount of yarn that you think you need as a tail just to be safe. And I know tails don't look pretty, but we can always weave them in. So it's better to go a bit longer than shorter because you save so much more time. Recommendations. So as I've said throughout the video, I would recommend that you start with the backwards loop method, and that's basically because it's the most simple method to learn, and although it won't look pretty, I don't imagine your first knitted piece, as I've said in previous videos, is going to be very pretty. So I would say learn how to cast on with that method, get to grips with knitting, then try other methods such as the Longtail cast on. I imagine if you don't think about knitting garments, then you probably won't need the Norwegian cast on method, but Longtail cast on is a method that you're going to use at some point in your knitting career. So we are so close to finally starting to knit. We've casted on. Next week I'll be telling you all about the knit stitch and the purl stitch, so watch out for that. If you don't want to miss that video, please do subscribe and click the notification bell. Set it to all so you don't miss my uploads. And if you liked this video, do please give it a like, it really helps me out. As I said, I upload on Wednesdays, and if you can't wait till Wednesdays and you really want to see this video early, I do post this video on Mondays to my Patreon. So if you really wanted to see how to knit and you're so eager and excited, please do go check that out. I also am on Twitch 3 times a week, Monday 6 PM, Tuesday 11 AM and Thursday 6 PM. Please do come hang out with us. We've got a good little community going and it's a lot of fun. Also check out my Instagram at @SmichaelGoesKnitting, where I post all my finished objects and my work in progresses. So if you're interested in seeing a better image of this cute crop top that I made, that's all over my Instagram. I hope you enjoyed this video and I'll see you all next week to start knitting. Stay wholesome!